When you first move to Australia, everyone sounds a bit weird. I mean, that goes even worse if you're genuinely foreign. And what I mean by that is English isn't your first language. Why does that make you genuinely foreign? But aside from the fact that it all sounds a bit weird, it feels like everyone's asking you a question. In Australia, there are just some genuine words that confuse foreigners. G'day, my name's Ross and I moved with my family to Australia during a global pandemic. And for the last nearly 5 years, I've been trying to become a little bit more Australian so that for the purpose of this video, I can use words in an Australian way to confuse more people, because I'm a saddo. But when I was fresh off the boat, I didn't understand what this word means. Even now, I see signs for this put up by the police, and it still confuses new people to Australia. What to you is hooning? Hooning, like H-O-O-N with an ing. When I first came here, I didn't have a clue what that meant. What in the world could be hooning? Well, apparently it's just driving poorly, which depending on who you speak to in Australia, could be lots of people. Sometimes unintentionally, that's just the way they drive. But hooning specifically, I guess, is normally reserved for younger people or for older people who never really grew up, have reasonably high-powered vehicles. I don't know how 17, 18-year-olds can get their hands on a V6 engine and then just drive it around without a care in the world on public roads, leaving burn marks into the tarmac because the cost of living isn't expensive enough that you need to buy more tyres. But I love nothing more than the face of someone new to Australia when they find out what hooning is. Fair dinkum. Now, you're going to be confused when you first hear that. Although confused, but you're holding on to the word fair. Like, so I know what fair means. What's a dinkum? Fair dinkum is pretty much just fairness, I guess. They just add the dinkum on to give whatever you're describing as fair as a subject. In my experience of the word fair dinkum, which still does kind of confuse me, I'm going to add that one in. But it just is a phrase used by Australians just to describe something that seems legitimate. Okay, fair dinkum, mate. Why can't it just be fair? Fair enough. Now I am part of the confusion when it comes to this next word because I now own one, even if it is a cheap Chinese one. But not only was this word confusing to me, but also when you drive around and you see them in all their wonder and glory, all the different shapes and sizes. And then for someone to call them a ute. What? I've heard of truck, pickup truck, that's an Americanism, but a ute? Apparently it's just short for a utility vehicle. Any kind of single or double cab with a tray on the back where you can just load up whatever you want. In Australia they don't really have vans so much, just the old trusty ute, which always seems very insecure. But I guess they don't really have as much theft in Australia as they do the UK. And utes just look a lot cooler than a van. They're probably just about as heavy, to be honest. Is a utility vehicle more useful than a van? Well, it bloody looks better. And I swear every foreigner, when they get told by their Australian friend, "Oh, just get in the ute, mate," they just smile and nod and wander off and watch where their friend goes because they have absolutely no idea what a ute is. Now you do. Now I did talk about this one on a previous video in the sense that I refuse to call bedding Manchester at all. Like, what the frickin' hell. But if that wasn't confusing enough, there is now a word to describe bedding that I do actually use. And a doona, which bit of the bedding is that, mate? Well, apparently the doona is the duvet, or the big bit that goes over. And this could be confusing to some foreigners depending on where it is that you live anyway, because I've heard, and you're a bit of a heathen I guess if you do, but some countries don't have a duvet. They just either have a sheet and then a blanket and then another sheet. Isn't that like what you get in prison? Sometimes I've stayed at hotels where that's all you get and you're kind of trying to pull it off the top of the bed and it just doesn't really feel right. Why would you not have a duvet? But in Australia they call them doonas. I think it's because there's like a brand called doona. And Australians do love calling things by a brand. But I don't know, is that true? Because I've never actually seen a doona brand. Maybe because I only really shop in Kmart. Is doona a brand? Because no one else has heard of it. What the hell's a doona? Now this next one I hadn't really ever heard of, even when I was looking for visa companies to try and help me move to Australia. But true blue is an Australian term to mean you're just very Australian. Did not know that. If you were to tell me what colour would you associate with Australians, I don't know. What colour would you even associate with English people? Is it red? You're only allowed one colour, so it can't really be red and white. Would it be red? Would it just be white? I don't know. I suppose that is the colour of the football shirt. But blue to describe an Australian, like, Green and gold, mate, that seems to be their main sporting colours. Why is it blue? Why is it well, I get it, to be a true blue if blue is the colour of Australia. Which I guess leads me quite nicely on to, if you want to move to Australia like me and get confused by all of the words and you want a visa agency to help you, then why not speak to the, by definition, most Australian one? True Blue Migration Services. And I guess if you are a true blue Australian, and to me being Australian is partly about being friendly and welcoming, this element of mateship and doing anything for your mates. Standard payment for a mate to do something to help you out is probably a slab of beer. But if you want to find out what you would need to do to move to Australia with True Blue Migration Services, when you mention us, they'll literally do it for free. You can send me the slab of beer if you really feel inclined. And to be even more true blue Australian, I guess, once you realise how fantastic their service is, because you mentioned us, you're also going to save $200 off the cost of your visa. I could not think of anything being more true blue Australian than True Blue Migration Services. All their details are in the description down below. But if you're not a true blue Australian, well, I guess some of them are, you might be described as a Derro. Now this one, I guess it still does really confuse me now, really, because I feel like it can be interchanged with the word bogan. But actually, as I've lived here for longer, I kind of feel more endeared to the boganism that we all kind of really do share. We're all a little bit bogan. So why is it then sometimes some people may appear a little bit bogan? Why would you call them Derro? I think it's from derelict, but it's one of the Australian shortenings you don't really hear that often. So is it something that's reserved for the worst bogans or the lowest of the bogans, the bogan of the bogans? Just didn't really know what Derro meant. And this other one, it kind of did confuse me again about what is it? A bit like fair dinkum, because when people use this term, they use it in a context that you kind of understand what it is that they mean, but why did they use that word? Because let's face it, we've all got a friend like this. You know, happy-go-lucky, a little bit cheeky, a little bit naughty, but always in good humour. So then to describe them as a larrikin. Apparently larrikins, they're only in Australia. Does this sum up the Australian kind of mentality? A way of being that is only in Australia? Because I swear, like, we had larrikin type people in the UK, but we just never really called them a larrikin. And also larrikin isn't spelt the way that you'd kind of think. There's an I in the middle, not an A. It's so confusing. And I bet there are going to be people that want to live in Australia, want to be more Australian, and they'll get called the larrikin. And they'll be like, what the frickin' hell's that? Now this next word I didn't really know kind of existed until someone used it, and I really was confused myself. Because coming from the UK, you have an accent specific to an area that you live or that you come from. You know, the north-south divide, even within southern counties, Cornish is very different to where I'm from in Kent. You can travel 50 kilometres and the accent can change twice, and there'll be a new name for bread rolls. In Australia, there isn't really a regional accent that you have. Like, they're just all Australian. Perhaps the only one they have is if you're from the western suburbs. And I guess you do notice how Australian someone is, in the sense that, you know, you might have a softer Australian accent versus a stronger Australian accent. And it turns out there's a word to describe this stronger Australian accent. Ochre. Now, not ochre, like the vegetable that I've never even eaten, and not like ochre, which isn't it like a colour? Ochre. So to be ochre is to sound more Australian. And I guess the general rule is the more ochre you are, the more northern in Australia you get, and probably the more regional, as in out of the cities, you get. So some family that lives out in Whoop Whoop, or as some other people might describe as bumfuck nowhere, that's probably like a really Australian accent. There may also be a correlation to how ochre you are versus how many teeth you've got, but I don't think it's fair to link it to someone's dental hygiene. Now this last word, I have to admit, was used with me for probably 2 or more years. And I just went along with believing that I knew what it meant. Please tell me that it's exclusive to Australia, because I have never heard of this word used outside of here. Wookus. And it's pronounced like that. Now, without any context, if you've never heard of the word wookus, put in the comments down below what you think it means. Because it is actually a word to describe something which I feel is Australian, but is now used so widely across the rest of the world. So if I was to say no wookus, what would you now be thinking? Because apparently wookus is interchangeable with the word worries. As in, yeah mate, no wookus, no worries. Is there a correlation between how ochre you are to the use of the word wookus, because apparently it's quite widely used, just not necessarily within the Australian circles that I'm speaking in. But I just love how some of the words in this list, without any context whatsoever, you have no idea what they mean. And then even when you do kind of drop them in the context, as a foreigner to Australia, you're still confused by, is that actually what I think it means? Living in Australia just really isn't easy, and it isn't made any easier by the confusing use of the words. So if you want to move to Australia and you want some more help with what it's like to actually live here, then check out this video, and I'll see you soon.